What if I told you Greg Doucette was the Walter White of smuggling steroids? Okay, maybe not Walter White, more like Jesse Pinkman. Picture this. The month was August 2012 and Greg Doucette was panicking. Border service officers were raiding his home. With a search warrant in hand, they were going through everything under Greg's name. His storage locker, his car, his home, you name it. Greg was in huge trouble. He had been smuggling steroids for years and left all of the evidence at home. If the officers searched hard enough, they would find all of the illegal materials that he was working with. Greg had left his home to go to the middle of the Maritimes region of Canada. His home was in the Halifax region of Canada, so he was nowhere to be seen as officers were raiding his home. Before he had left his home, he was in the middle of packaging a new round of testosterone powder. So when officers abruptly arrived, they found all of the packages and illegal steroids that he was smuggling. 56 envelopes of raw testosterone powder and 16,000 pills were laid out everywhere. The officers were left in shock. This is the story of how Greg Doucette smuggled millions of dollars worth of steroids. It might surprise you that before Greg could shamelessly sell his cookbook and supplements, he actually had an entirely different illegal operation going on. Picture this. The month was July 2010. Border officers were going through packages at a mail center. All of a sudden, they stumbled on something suspicious. Envelopes and small brown boxes were coming from China, Thailand, and the Philippines. All of these packages were being sent in the Halifax region of Nova Scotia, Canada. One man's name kept appearing on the packages. Greg Austin Doucette. Border officers thought something was off. Why were so many suspicious packages being sent to Greg's house? They immediately teared open the packages. You see, border officers have an incentive to catch illegal activity. If they find something suspicious, they get rewarded big time from their bosses. So the officers tore open each package and found random objects. Inside each random object were 2 pouches of 100 grams of raw steroid powder. This left the officers in shock. Each one of those steroid pouches were worth $5,000 on the black market. This meant that they had not only discovered an illegal operation worth tons of money, but also the steroid plug for hundreds of people across Canada. The discovery had the potential to uncover a massive drug trafficking ring. The officers immediately notified their bosses, and their bosses then notified their own bosses. This eventually led to the man at the top of the food pyramid. That man was Albert Prince, the manager of Criminal Services at Halifax. Albert was determined to dedicate his office to crack down on Greg. Albert and his team quickly searched around to get as much evidence as they could. Albert had a couple options. He could take in the steroid packages and try to convict Greg, but this wouldn't be enough evidence. If Albert tried to take the case to court with the steroid packages, he simply wouldn't be able to put Greg in jail. There wasn't any evidence that Greg was selling the steroids to other people. Not only that, but there were other people to catch too. Albert suspected that at this scale, Greg probably wasn't the only one involved in the operation. So if Albert took the packages in, Greg would find his packages missing. This would lead to Greg notifying everyone in the steroid trafficking operation. And if that happened, that meant that everyone else would get away scot-free. So the only way to take Greg to jail was to gather more evidence. If Albert simply let Greg's steroid packages go through unharmed, Greg would continue smuggling steroids like nothing had ever happened. Albert knew this option was the best way to go. By letting the packages go through, Albert could gather enough information to get a search warrant. So with the help of the Canada Post organization, Albert watched Greg's packages go through over the next few months. Albert and his team took notes on each package and began noticing patterns. They figured out exactly where the steroid packages were coming from, how much steroids were coming through, and how the steroids were packed. After 25 months of scraping information together, Albert had enough information to get a search warrant on Greg's property. He brought his team to raid Greg's property and they found something shocking. Greg had enough material to make thousands of doses of steroids. An entire underground business worth millions of dollars was hiding in Greg Doucette's home. After the officers did a thorough search on Greg's property, they ended up seizing $23,000 in cash. They had also found $250,000 in steroids and steroid distribution materials. At first, the officers thought they had caught the whole operation red-handed, but so many questions lingered. Who was Greg sending the envelopes to? Where was his lab? The officers thought about it for a while and they realized that Greg wasn't even the kingpin of the operation. He didn't even have several steps in his house for full steroid distribution. For example, he didn't have the equipment to turn the raw steroid powder into liquid. Albert and his team needed to lock in and find the kingpin. Time was ticking down. It would only be a matter of time before Greg's bosses found out what was happening. The investigation, which was now dubbed Project Juice, needed to ramp up its efforts faster. Albert and his team interrogated Greg and did some more digging. After 15 months of hard work, Albert figured out who Greg's boss was. Greg's boss was a bodybuilder by the name of Jason Eggleston. According to Albert's information, everything would unravel if they could just crack down on Jason. In November 2012, Canadian authorities approached Jason's home. Jason was in the middle of a phone call with his associates. If Jason was innocent, he would just end the phone call and hand over his BlackBerry phone. But Jason was Greg's boss and he was caught red-handed. In a deep panic, Jason needed to get rid of the phone fast. As officers came in closer and closer, Jason suddenly threw his phone in his koi pond. Officers rushed over and jumped into the pond. They reached to the bottom of the pond and quickly retrieved Jason's phone. If the phone turned on, then all of the information on the operation would be exposed. When the officers proceeded to raid Jason's home, they quickly realized that Jason was much smarter than Greg. Unlike Greg, he didn't have all of his incriminating evidence just laid out in his home. But Jason wasn't smart enough to realize one thing. His phone was the key to all of the information that the officers needed. Unfortunately for Jason, his BlackBerry phone was still working perfectly, and the BlackBerry phone had some crucial information that Albert needed. For example, the phone had all of Jason's revenue laid out in score sheets. In the drug dealing world, score sheets are used by dealers to keep track of sales, so they now had records of all of Jason's sales. They also now had access to Jason's texts. His texts revealed that Jason and his partner, Gautam Srivastava, had a team of associates. One of their most loyal associates happened to be Greg Doucette. Gautam was a former professor at the University of Victoria, and he was the brains behind the operation. Gautam and Jason were worried about authorities cracking down on them, but they had a bigger issue going on. A competitor was getting good reviews, which was suspicious. Nobody could make steroids as well as them. Besides, the officers hadn't even found their lab yet, so they wondered if their associates could be pinching their product. Were associates like Greg stealing their product and then giving it to competitors the whole time? Jason told Gautam that there was no way this could be happening. He said that their associates like Greg were literally dum-dums. Not only that, but their associates were also very loyal to them. While this was happening, Jason and Gautam were also dealing with another issue. Their supply chain was in deep trouble after Greg got caught. Greg helped source their raw testosterone powder. Without Greg being part of the equation, they had a gaping hole. In early 2013, Jason and Gautam made a deal with another dealer. They traded 500 of their liquid bottles for raw powder. They went by the alias Ben Lob and successfully made the transaction. But little did they know that at this time, Albert had gained enough information from the BlackBerry phone to finally crack down on them. If Albert could finally end Project Juice, they would finally be able to sentence the man who started it all, Greg Doucette. In November of 2013, Albert and his team offered Jason a plea deal. This deal was given on the condition that Jason would help them on their operation. Jason gave in and pleaded guilty. With all of these resources in their hands, in that same month, Albert and his team arrested Gautam. They raided Gautam's assets and found something crazy. Inside Gautam's car were steroids disguised as laundry detergent. They also found boxes from China and Hong Kong labeled as living supplies when in reality, those supplies were actually hiding steroids. In February of 2014, authorities raided their lab and found 22 kilograms of steroid powder. The powder was valued at a whopping $2 million. They also found $15,000 in cash, 150,000 pills, 5,600 vials, and 250 dropper bottles. Gautam tried to deny knowing Jason, but the bank records were clear. He had sent over $150,000 to Asia in over 200 transactions. More and more people in the operation started to get caught. A father and his brother got caught red-handed, and a mailing guy also got caught. On April 30th of 2014, Greg Austin Doucette was officially charged. He was charged $12,500 for each Controlled Drug and Substances Act. He was also charged $25,000 $25,000 for a custom act charge. This added up to $50,000 in fines. In addition to this, Greg was also sentenced to a 20-month conditional sentence. On top of all this, he got 1 year of probation on each charge, so that ended up adding to 3 years of probation. Moreover, he was forced to forfeit all of his illegal materials and cash. Greg swore to change after this and claims he is now a different person. For the first time in many years, Greg has recently been allowed back into the United States. What do you think about Greg smuggling steroids? This video took me over 50 hours of work to research. If you want to see more in-depth videos like this, please hit the like and subscribe button. But for now, peace out.